The transition from winter to spring in Viking Age Scandinavia marked one of the most dangerous periods of the year. Food stores were depleted. Preserved supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. Families faced what historians call the hunger gap, those critical weeks when winter provisions ran out before summer crops could be harvested. During this time, Vikings turned to the land itself, foraging for wild plants that appeared as soon as the snow began to melt. These weren't mere supplements to their diet. These were survival foods that meant the difference between life and death. Dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, the complete survival plant. Long before suburban homeowners declared war on dandelions, Vikings recognized this plant as one of spring's first and most valuable food sources. Every part of the dandelion was used: leaves, roots, flowers, even the white sap, making it a complete nutrition package that appeared while snow still covered the ground in patches. What made dandelions extraordinary was their timing and completeness. The leaves emerged as one of the first greens of spring, providing bitter, nutrient-dense food when bodies were depleted from months of preserved meat and grain. The roots, dug before the plant flowered, were roasted and ground into a coffee-like drink or cooked as vegetables. The bright yellow flowers were eaten fresh, fermented into wine, or dried for later use. Modern nutritional analysis reveals why Vikings valued every part of this plant. Dandelion leaves contain more vitamin A than carrots, more iron than spinach, and significant amounts of calcium, potassium, and vitamins C and K. The roots contain inulin, a prebiotic fiber that supports digestive health, particularly important after a winter diet heavy in preserved meats. The entire plant acts as a natural diuretic and liver tonic, helping bodies transition from winter's heavy foods to spring's fresh diet. For today's foragers, dandelions offer the same benefits Vikings recognized over 1,000 years ago. Harvest young leaves before flowers appear for the mildest flavor. They're excellent in salads or cooked like spinach. Dig roots in early spring or late fall when they're most nutritious. The flowers can be battered and fried, added to salads, or fermented. Best of all, they're growing in nearly every lawn and field across North America, completely free and requiring zero cultivation. The plant that modern society spends millions trying to eradicate was once considered so valuable that Viking families knew exactly where the best patches grew and returned to them every spring. Nettle, Urtica dioica, the stinging superfood, the same plant that causes painful welts when touched carelessly, was among the most important spring foods in Viking culture. Stinging nettles appear in early spring, often while frost still threatens, and provided nutrition so concentrated that Norse communities considered them essential medicine as much as food. What made nettles truly valuable was their exceptional nutrient density appearing at the most critical time. Young nettle shoots, harvested when 6 to 8 inches, 15 to 20 centimeters tall, contain more protein than most vegetables, along with exceptional levels of iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A, C, and K. For Viking families weakened by winter's limited diet, nettles provided an immediate nutritional boost that could reverse deficiency symptoms within days. The chemistry behind nettles' sting is actually part of their nutritional power. The hollow hairs that inject formic acid and histamine into skin are neutralized by cooking, drying, or even thorough crushing. Once processed, nettles become a tender, spinach-like green with a rich, slightly earthy flavor. Vikings prepared them in soups, cooked them with grains, dried them for winter use, and even made nettle beer, a fermented drink that preserved the plant's nutrition while providing calories and hydration. Modern research has confirmed many traditional uses of nettles. Studies show they have anti-inflammatory properties, support kidney function, and may help with seasonal allergies. The plant contains compounds that support iron absorption, particularly important for women and children in Viking communities who were most vulnerable to anemia after winter's limited diet. For modern foragers, nettles are abundant in moist, nitrogen-rich soils across North America and Europe. Wear gloves when harvesting, cut the top 4 to 6 inches, 10 to 15 centimeters, of young plants, and process them quickly. They lose nutritional value within hours of harvest. Steam or blanch them briefly, and the sting disappears completely, leaving you with one of the most nutritious wild greens available. Vikings didn't just tolerate nettles' sting. They sought these plants out specifically because that sting indicated the concentrated nutrition their bodies desperately needed after winter. Ramsonus wild garlic, Allium ursinum, the warrior's power plant. In the damp woodlands of Scandinavia and Viking settlements across northern Europe, wild garlic carpeted the forest floor each spring, filling the air with its unmistakable aroma. Vikings called it ramson, and they believed it provided strength and vitality, particularly important for warriors preparing for the raiding season that began each spring. What made ramson special was its early appearance and powerful medicinal properties. The leaves emerged in late winter or very early spring, often pushing through the last snow. The entire plant, leaves, stems, flowers, and bulbs, was edible and provided not just nutrition, but natural antibiotic and antiviral compounds that helped communities recover from winter illnesses that spread through crowded longhouses. The sulfur compounds that give ramson its characteristic garlic smell are the same compounds that provide its health benefits. Modern research has confirmed that wild garlic contains allicin, the same compound found in cultivated garlic, which has antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral properties. It also supports cardiovascular health, helps regulate blood pressure, and may improve circulation. All benefits that would have been noticeable to Viking communities, even if they didn't understand the chemistry. Vikings used ramson extensively in spring cooking. The leaves were chopped and added to soups, stews, and porridges. The bulbs were dug and used like cultivated garlic. The flowers, which appeared later in spring, were eaten fresh or preserved in salt. Some evidence suggests Vikings also made ramson paste by grinding the leaves with salt, creating a preserved condiment that could last weeks. For today's foragers, wild garlic is abundant in moist, shaded woodlands across Europe and parts of North America. The leaves are best harvested before the plant flowers, when they're most tender. Be absolutely certain of identification. Some toxic plants have similar leaves, but ramson's strong garlic smell is unmistakable when leaves are crushed. Use it anywhere you'd use cultivated garlic, but know that the flavor is milder and more complex. The plant Vikings believed gave warriors strength is now recognized by modern science as a powerful supporter of immune function and cardiovascular health, exactly what bodies needed after months of winter confinement. Birch sap, Betula species, the tree's spring blood. As temperatures rose above freezing during the day, but still dropped below freezing at night, Vikings tapped birch trees for their sap, a clear, slightly sweet liquid that flowed for just a few weeks each spring. This wasn't a minor food source. A single mature birch could yield 10 to 20 gallons, 38 to 76 liters, of sap during the tapping season, providing fresh hydration and nutrition when water sources were still partially frozen. What made birch sap extraordinary was its unique nutritional profile and perfect timing. The sap flows as the tree mobilizes stored nutrients to support new spring growth, creating a liquid rich in minerals, vitamins, amino acids, and natural sugars. For Viking communities, this provided essential micronutrients, particularly manganese, magnesium, calcium, and vitamin C, at exactly the moment when winter stores were depleted and scurvy threatened. The process Vikings used was remarkably sophisticated. They drilled or cut small holes in the trunk about 3 to 4 feet, 0.9 to 1.2 meters, above ground, inserted hollow reeds or carved wooden spouts, and collected the sap in vessels. The trees were never overtapped. Norse communities understood that taking too much would damage or kill the tree, destroying a resource they depended on year after year. After tapping season ended, they sealed the holes with pine resin to prevent infection. Modern analysis shows birch sap contains fructose and glucose for quick energy, along with organic acids, minerals, and compounds with antioxidant properties. Fresh sap was drunk immediately, but Vikings also reduced it by boiling to create a sweet syrup, fermented it into a mildly alcoholic beverage, or used it as a base for cooking. Some evidence suggests they combined birch sap with herbs and berries to create medicinal drinks. For modern foragers interested in tapping birch trees, the season runs from late February through April, depending on latitude. You need temperatures above freezing during the day and below freezing at night. Use a drill bit about 0.4 inches, 1 centimeter, in diameter. Drill 1 to 2 inches, 2.5 to 5 centimeters, deep at a slight upward angle, and never take more than 1 gallon, 3.8 liters, per 10 inches, 25 centimeters, of trunk diameter. Seal holes with natural wax when finished. The clear liquid that Vikings called tree blood provided hydration, nutrition, and medicine during those critical weeks when winter's grip was loosening, but spring's abundance hadn't yet arrived. Pine inner bark, Pinus sylvestris, the bark bread that prevented starvation. When winter stores ran dangerously low and spring foraging hadn't yet begun in earnest, Vikings turned to a food source that sounds desperate, but was actually carefully managed: the inner bark of pine trees. This wasn't random tree destruction, it was a sophisticated survival technique that provided calories and nutrition without killing the trees. What made pine inner bark valuable was the cambium layer, the thin, living tissue between the outer bark and the wood. This layer is rich in carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals, particularly vitamin C. Vikings carefully harvested vertical strips of bark, never girdling the tree completely, which would kill it. The cambium was scraped away, leaving the tree able to heal and continue growing. The process required knowledge and skill. Vikings selected mature pine trees, made vertical cuts through the outer bark, and carefully peeled strips about 4 to 6 inches, 10 to 15 centimeters, wide. The cambium layer was scraped off with knives or specialized tools, then processed immediately. Fresh cambium could be eaten raw. It has a slightly sweet, resinous flavor, but was more commonly dried and ground into flour. This bark flour was mixed with grain flour to extend limited supplies, or in desperate times, used alone to make a dense, nutritious bread. Archaeological evidence from famine periods in Scandinavia shows increased consumption of bark bread, and the practice continued in Nordic countries well into the 19th century during crop failures. The bread was heavy and required strong teeth, but it provided calories and prevented starvation when other foods weren't available. Modern survival experts have confirmed that pine cambium is indeed nutritious and edible. It contains vitamin C, which prevented scurvy, along with fiber, minerals, and enough calories to sustain life. The resinous compounds also have mild antiseptic properties. However, this should only be harvested in genuine survival situations or from trees that are being cut down anyway. Improper harvesting can seriously damage or kill trees. For Viking communities, knowing how to harvest pine bark without destroying the forest was essential survival knowledge. It represented the difference between starvation and survival during the Hunger Gap, and it demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of sustainable resource management. What modern society might view as desperate tree destruction was actually a carefully controlled technique that saved lives while preserving the forest for future generations. Scurvy grass, Cochlearia officinalis, the plant named for what it prevents. Along the rocky coastlines where Vikings established settlements, a small, unassuming plant grew in the spray zone where saltwater met land. Scurvy grass earned its name centuries after the Viking Age, but Norse sailors and coastal communities knew its value long before anyone understood vitamin C or scurvy's cause. What made scurvy grass essential was its exceptional vitamin C content, appearing in very early spring. The plant contains more vitamin C per weight than citrus fruits, and it grows in harsh coastal conditions where few other fresh foods are available. For Viking sailors preparing for spring voyages and families recovering from winter's limited diet, scurvy grass provided immediate protection against the disease that killed more sailors than storms or combat. The plant's peppery, slightly bitter leaves were eaten fresh, chopped into soups and stews, or preserved in salt for sea voyages. Vikings didn't understand the chemistry, but they observed that communities and ship crews who regularly consumed scurvy grass remained healthier than those who didn't. This empirical knowledge was passed down through generations, becoming standard practice for provisioning longships. Modern research has confirmed scurvy grass contains not just vitamin C, but also glucose inolates, compounds found in the cabbage family that have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. The plant also contains minerals like iron, calcium, and iodine, which would have been particularly valuable for coastal populations whose diet was heavily based on fish and preserved foods. For today's coastal foragers, scurvy grass grows in salt marshes, rocky shores, and coastal cliffs across the North Atlantic. The leaves are best harvested in early spring before the plant flowers. The flavor is strong, peppery, and slightly bitter, so it's best used in small amounts mixed with milder greens or cooked into dishes. A small handful provides more than the daily requirement of vitamin C. The plant that would eventually be named for the disease it prevents was already saving Viking lives centuries before anyone understood why. It represents the sophisticated observational knowledge that allowed Norse communities to thrive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Sorrel, Rumex acatosa, the northern lemon. In meadows and woodland edges across Viking territories, sorrel appeared as one of the first greens of spring, its arrow-shaped leaves providing a sharp, lemony flavor that Vikings craved after months of bland, preserved foods. This wasn't just about taste. Sorrel's high vitamin C content made it essential medicine disguised as food. What made sorrel truly valuable was its combination of early appearance, distinctive flavor, and nutritional power. The leaves contain oxalic acid, which gives them their characteristic sour taste, the same compound found in rhubarb. This acidity made sorrel useful for cutting through the richness of fatty, preserved meats and fish, making heavy winter foods more digestible as bodies transitioned to spring's lighter diet. Vikings used sorrel extensively in spring cooking. The leaves were chopped and added to soups, creating a tangy broth that stimulated appetite after winter's monotonous diet. They were cooked with fish, mixed into porridges, or eaten fresh in small amounts. Some evidence suggests Vikings also made sorrel drinks by steeping the leaves in water, creating a refreshing, vitamin-rich beverage. Modern nutritional analysis shows sorrel contains significant vitamin C, vitamin A, magnesium, and iron. The oxalic acid that provides its flavor also has mild diuretic properties, which may have helped Viking bodies eliminate toxins accumulated during winter. However, the same oxalic acid means sorrel should be eaten in moderation. Large amounts can interfere with calcium absorption and may be problematic for people prone to kidney stones. For modern foragers, sorrel is easy to identify by its distinctive, arrow-shaped leaves and sour taste. It grows in meadows, gardens, and woodland edges across North America and Europe. Harvest young leaves before the plant flowers for the best flavor. Older leaves become increasingly bitter and tough. Use sorrel like you'd use lemon juice. To brighten flavors, add acidity to rich dishes, or create refreshing spring soups. The plant that provided Vikings with their northern lemon is still growing wild, offering the same bright, tangy flavor and vitamin C that sustained Norse communities through the hunger gap over 1,000 years ago. Silverweed roots, Potentilla anserina, the underground spring potatoes. While most spring foraging focused on emerging greens, Vikings also dug for roots that had stored energy through the winter. Silverweed, a low-growing plant with distinctive silver-backed leaves, produced small, starchy roots that could be harvested as soon as the ground thawed, providing carbohydrates when grain stores were running dangerously low. What made silverweed roots special was their starch content and availability. Unlike many root vegetables that become woody or depleted by spring, silverweed roots remain nutritious and palatable. The roots are small, typically 2 to 4 inches, 5 to 10 centimeters long and about as thick as a finger, but they grow in clusters, and a productive patch could yield significant food with patient digging. Vikings prepared silverweed roots in several ways. They were roasted directly in coals, boiled in soups and stews, or dried and ground into flour to extend grain supplies. The flavor is mildly sweet and nutty, similar to parsnips or sweet potatoes, but more delicate. The roots could also be dried for storage, providing a backup food source that lasted months. Archaeological evidence from Viking-age settlements shows silverweed was widely used across Scandinavia and Norse settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and the British Isles. The plant grows in damp meadows, along streams, and in coastal areas, exactly the environments where Viking communities established settlements. Knowledge of productive silverweed patches was valuable information passed down through families. Modern foragers should know that silverweed roots are most productive in early spring before the plant puts energy into flowering. Look for the distinctive leaves, a compound with 15 to 25 leaflets that are green on top and silvery underneath. Dig carefully to avoid breaking the roots, and never harvest more than 1/3 of any patch to ensure it regenerates. The roots can be eaten raw, but are more digestible when cooked. For Viking families facing the hunger gap, these small underground potatoes provided essential carbohydrates that bridged the gap between depleted grain stores and the first harvest of cultivated crops. They represent the detailed environmental knowledge that allowed Norse communities to extract nutrition from landscapes that seemed barren to outsiders. Fiddlehead ferns, Mateuccia struthiopteris, the alien spring delicacy. As the snow melted and forest floors warmed, tightly coiled fern fronds emerged, looking like alien sculptures or the scrolled head of a violin. Vikings recognized these fiddleheads as a prized spring food, harvesting them during the brief window when they were tender and edible. What made fiddleheads valuable was their unique texture, flavor, and the fact that they appeared in abundance during a narrow harvest window. The tightly coiled fronds of ostrich ferns were the primary species Vikings harvested. They're covered in brown, papery scales and emerge in clusters from the forest floor. The flavor is often compared to asparagus, with nutty undertones, and the texture when properly cooked is tender, yet slightly crisp. The harvest window for fiddleheads is remarkably short, typically just 10 to 14 days in any given location. Vikings had to know exactly where productive fern patches grew and monitor them carefully. Once the fronds begin to unfurl, they become tough and bitter. This narrow window made fiddleheads a special seasonal treat rather than a staple food, but their abundance during peak season meant families could harvest significant quantities. Vikings prepared fiddleheads by boiling or steaming them, often finishing them with butter or animal fat. The brown scales were rubbed off before cooking. Modern food safety research has confirmed that fiddleheads must be thoroughly cooked. They contain compounds that can cause digestive upset if eaten raw or undercooked. Vikings' traditional preparation methods were exactly right. For modern foragers, proper identification is critical. Ostrich fern fiddleheads, Matutia struthiops, are the safest species. They have a deep U-shaped groove on the inside of the stem and are covered in brown papery scales, not fuzz. Harvest when the fronds are still tightly coiled, no more than 2 inches, 5 centimeters, above ground, and never take more than half the fronds from any plant. Boil or steam for at least 10 to 15 minutes before eating. The brief appearance of these alien-looking spring delicacies marked the transition from winter scarcity to spring's abundance, and Viking families celebrated their arrival as a sign that the hunger gap was ending. Chickweed, Stellaria media, the tender spring weed. In gardens, fields, and disturbed soil across Viking settlements, chickweed appeared as one of the first tender greens of spring. Modern gardeners curse it as a persistent weed, but Vikings recognized it as valuable food that appeared early, grew abundantly, and required no cultivation. What made chickweed special was its mild flavor and tender texture. Unlike many wild greens that are bitter or tough, chickweed tastes mild and slightly sweet, similar to lettuce but with more substance. The entire above-ground plant is edible: stems, leaves, flowers, and even the small seeds. This made it easy to harvest quickly by simply cutting handfuls with a knife. Vikings used chickweed extensively in spring cooking. It was eaten raw in salads, cooked like spinach, added to soups and stews, or mixed with other greens. The mild flavor made it particularly suitable for children and elderly family members who might reject more bitter wild greens. Chickweed also has a high water content, providing hydration along with nutrition. Modern nutritional analysis shows chickweed contains vitamins A, C, and several B vitamins, along with minerals including calcium, magnesium, and iron. It also contains saponins, compounds that may support the immune system and have mild anti-inflammatory properties. Traditional herbalists have used chickweed for centuries to soothe skin irritations and support digestive health. For today's foragers, chickweed is almost absurdly easy to find. It grows as a weed in gardens, lawns, and disturbed soil across North America and Europe. Identify it by its small, oval leaves growing in opposite pairs, tiny white star-shaped flowers, and a distinctive line of hairs running up one side of the stem. Harvest the top 3 to 4 inches, 7.6 to 10 centimeters, of growth, and it will regrow quickly. The flavor is best before the plant flowers heavily. The plant that modern gardeners spend time and money trying to eliminate was once considered valuable enough that Viking families knew exactly where the best patches grew and returned to them throughout spring. Ground elder goutweed, Agopodium podagraria. The garden invader. Vikings treasured. Modern gardeners know ground elder as one of the most persistent and difficult to eradicate weeds. Vikings knew it as one of the most reliable and nutritious spring greens, so valuable that they deliberately planted it near settlements and encouraged its spread. What made ground elder extraordinary was its early appearance, aggressive growth, and nutritional density. The young leaves emerge very early in spring, often while frost still threatens, and they continue producing tender new growth for weeks. The plant spreads vigorously through underground rhizomes, creating dense patches that could feed entire families. What modern gardeners curse as invasiveness, Vikings valued as reliability. The young leaves have a flavor reminiscent of parsley and celery, with a slight bitterness. Vikings harvested them when they were still light green and tender, before they fully unfurled. The leaves were eaten raw in small amounts, but more commonly cooked like spinach, added to soups, or mixed with grains. Some evidence suggests Vikings also ate the young flower buds before they opened. Modern nutritional analysis shows ground elder contains significant vitamin C, vitamin A, protein, and minerals, including calcium, iron, and potassium. The plant also contains compounds with anti-inflammatory properties, which may explain its traditional use for treating gout, hence the common name goutweed. Medieval monks deliberately cultivated it in monastery gardens for both food and medicine. For modern foragers, ground elder is abundant, perhaps too abundant, in gardens, parks, and woodland edges across North America and Europe. Identify it by its compound leaves, divided into 3 groups of 3 leaflets, each with serrated edges. The young leaves are the best eating. Older leaves become tough and increasingly bitter. Harvest the top few inches of new growth, and the plant will produce more. The irony is perfect. The plant that Vikings valued so highly they deliberately spread it has now become such a successful colonizer that gardeners consider it a nightmare. But for foragers willing to harvest it, ground elder provides the same abundant, nutritious spring greens that sustained Viking communities over a millennium ago. Wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, Docus carota, the ancestor in the field. In meadows and field edges across Viking territories, wild carrots grew, the direct ancestor of the orange vegetables we know today. Vikings dug the roots in early spring before the plant put energy into flowering, finding small, pale roots that bore little resemblance to modern cultivated carrots, but provided valuable nutrition during the hunger gap. What made wild carrot roots valuable was their availability when other root vegetables were depleted or sprouting. The roots are much smaller and tougher than cultivated carrots, typically 4 to 6 inches, 10 to 15 centimeters, long and about as thick as a finger, but they have a strong aromatic carrot flavor and contain concentrated nutrients. The roots are white or pale yellow, not orange, because the orange color was bred into carrots much later. Vikings prepared wild carrot roots by boiling or roasting them until tender. They're too tough to eat raw. The roots were added to soups and stews, cooked with grains, or roasted alongside meat. The strong flavor went a long way in seasoning dishes. Vikings also used the aromatic seeds as a spice, and may have eaten the young spring leaves, though these are less documented. Modern foragers must exercise extreme caution with wild carrots because they closely resemble poison hemlock, Conium matum, which is deadly. The key differences: wild carrot has a hairy stem and smells like carrots when any part is crushed. Poison hemlock has a smooth, purple-spotted stem and smells musty or unpleasant. When in doubt, do not harvest. This is not a plant for beginners. Archaeological evidence shows wild carrots were used across Viking territories, and the plant eventually spread to North America, where it now grows wild across most of the continent. The roots are most tender in early spring of the plant's second year, before it flowers. First-year roots are smaller, but also edible. For Viking communities, wild carrots represented a connection between foraged and cultivated foods. They were managing and semi-cultivating these plants long before modern agriculture developed the orange carrots we know today. The wild ancestor still grows in fields and meadows, offering the same nutrition that sustained Norse families during spring's critical weeks. Burdock, Arctium lapa, the Velcro plant with edible roots. Vikings knew burdock long before its hooked seed burrs inspired the invention of Velcro in the 20th century. They valued it for its substantial roots that could be dug in early spring, providing starchy, nutritious food when other root vegetables were exhausted or beginning to sprout. What made burdock roots special was their size and substance. Unlike many wild roots that are small and fiddly to harvest, burdock produces substantial taproots that can reach 12 to 24 inches, 30 to 61 centimeters long, and 1 to 2 inches, 2.5 to 5 centimeters, in diameter. A single mature plant could provide a significant amount of food, making the effort of digging worthwhile. The roots are best harvested in early spring of the plant's first year, before it puts energy into flowering. The flavor of burdock root is earthy and slightly sweet, with a texture similar to parsnips when cooked. Vikings prepared burdock roots by scraping off the outer skin, then boiling, roasting, or adding them to stews. The roots could also be sliced and dried for storage. In addition to the roots, Vikings ate the young leaf stalks in spring, peeled and cooked like celery. Modern nutritional analysis shows burdock roots contain inulin, a prebiotic fiber, vitamins B6 and E, potassium, magnesium, and manganese. Traditional medicine systems across Europe and Asia have used burdock for centuries as a blood purifier and to support liver and kidney function. Modern research suggests it may have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. For today's foragers, burdock grows abundantly in disturbed soils, along roadsides, and in field edges across North America and Europe. Identify it by its large, heart-shaped leaves, often over 12 inches, 30 centimeters across, and the hooked burrs that appear later in the season. Dig first-year roots in early spring or late fall. Second-year roots become woody and bitter. The digging requires effort, but the substantial roots make it worthwhile. The plant that would eventually inspire a modern fastening system provided Vikings with substantial, nutritious roots during the critical spring weeks when food stores were at their lowest. It represents the kind of high-value foraged food that made the difference between mere survival and maintaining strength for the demanding work of spring planting and preparation. Sea beet, Beta vulgaris maritima, the coastal superfood. Along the salt-sprayed coastlines where Vikings established fishing settlements and boat landings, sea beet grew in the harsh transition zone between land and sea. This wild plant is the direct ancestor of all cultivated beets, chard, and sugar beets. But Vikings knew it simply as a reliable coastal green that appeared early in spring and tolerated conditions where few other plants could survive. What made sea beet extraordinary was its combination of salt tolerance, early appearance, and exceptional nutrition. The plant grows in coastal shingle, salt marshes, and rocky shores, where salt spray would kill most vegetables. For Viking coastal communities, whose diet was heavily based on fish and preserved foods, sea beet provided essential vitamins and minerals that balanced their protein-rich but vegetable-poor diet. The leaves are thick, glossy, and slightly salty from the coastal environment. They require no additional salt when cooked. Vikings harvested the young leaves in spring before they became tough and bitter. The leaves were cooked like spinach, added to fish stews, or mixed with grains. The roots were also edible, but much smaller and tougher than cultivated beets. Vikings likely used them primarily in times of scarcity. Modern nutritional analysis shows sea beet leaves are exceptionally rich in vitamins A, C, and K, along with minerals including iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. The plant also contains betalains, the same pigments found in cultivated beets, which have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. The natural saltiness means the plant provides sodium, which would have been valuable for people doing hard physical labor. For modern coastal foragers, sea beet grows along Atlantic and Mediterranean coastlines in Europe and has been introduced to some North American coastal areas. Identify it by its glossy dark green leaves, reddish stems, and coastal habitat. Harvest young leaves in spring, and the plant will continue producing new growth. The flavor is similar to chard, but with a pleasant saltiness and slightly mineral taste. The wild ancestor of modern beets provided Viking coastal communities with reliable nutrition in an environment where cultivated vegetables struggled. It represents the sophisticated way Norse people adapted their foraging to specific environments, knowing which plants thrived in conditions others couldn't tolerate. Willow catkins, Salix species, the spring medicine. As temperatures warmed in early spring, willow trees produced fuzzy catkins, the male flowers that appeared before the leaves. Vikings recognized these as both food and medicine, harvesting them during the brief period when they were tender and edible. What made willow catkins valuable was their early appearance and medicinal properties. The catkins emerge very early in spring, often while snow still covers the ground, providing one of the first signs that winter was ending. While not particularly nutritious, they were edible and contained compounds that Vikings recognized as pain-relieving and fever-reducing, though they didn't understand that willow bark and catkins contain salicin, the compound that inspired the development of aspirin. Vikings ate young willow catkins raw or cooked them briefly. The flavor is mild and slightly bitter, with a fuzzy texture that some found pleasant and others tolerated for the medicinal benefits. More commonly, Vikings made willow bark tea, which extracted the pain-relieving compounds more effectively. This was particularly important in spring when winter injuries and illnesses were still affecting community members. Modern research has confirmed that willow contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Willow has been used for pain relief and fever reduction for thousands of years across multiple cultures. However, people allergic to aspirin should avoid willow, and it shouldn't be given to children due to the risk of Reyes syndrome. For modern foragers, willow catkins appear in early spring on various willow species across North America and Europe. The male catkins are fuzzy and yellow with pollen. Female catkins are green and less showy. Harvest when they're young and tender. Older catkins become tough and cottony. The inner bark can be harvested year-round for medicinal tea, but spring bark is considered most potent. The fuzzy catkins that signaled spring's arrival to Viking communities also provided medicine that eased the aches and pains accumulated during winter's hard work and confinement. They represent the overlap between food and medicine that characterized Viking foraging knowledge. Hop shoots, Humulus lupulus, the beer plant's edible spring delicacy. Vikings knew hops primarily as the plant that flavored and preserved their beer, but they also recognized that the young spring shoots were edible and delicious. These tender shoots appeared in early spring from the perennial roots, and they were harvested before the plant put energy into climbing and producing the cone-like flowers used in brewing. What made hop shoots special was their asparagus-like flavor and texture. The young shoots, harvested when they're 6 to 8 inches, 15 to 20 centimeters, tall, are tender, slightly bitter, and have a complex flavor that's been compared to asparagus with nutty undertones. In modern European cuisine, hop shoots are considered a delicacy and can command high prices, but Vikings simply recognized them as good spring food growing near their settlements. Vikings prepared hop shoots by boiling or steaming them briefly, then finishing them with butter or animal fat. They could also be added to soups and stews. The harvest window is relatively short. Once the shoots begin to develop leaves and start climbing, they become tough and bitter. This made hop shoots a special seasonal treat, rather than a staple food. Modern nutritional analysis shows hop shoots contain vitamins C and B complex, along with minerals and compounds with mild sedative properties, the same compounds that make hops useful in brewing and herbal medicine. The shoots are much milder than the mature flowers, but they still contain some of the bitter compounds that characterize hops. For modern foragers, hops grow wild along streams, woodland edges, and disturbed areas across North America and Europe, often escaped from cultivation. The plant is easily identified by its distinctive 3-lobed leaves and climbing habit. Harvest shoots in early spring when they're tender, and before they begin climbing vigorously. The shoots can be eaten raw in small amounts, but are better cooked. The plant that Vikings cultivated primarily for brewing also provided a spring delicacy that marked the transition from winter's scarcity to spring's abundance. It represents the multiple uses Vikings found for plants they valued. Nothing was single purpose when survival depended on extracting maximum value from every resource. Pignut, earthnut, Conopodium majus, the hidden underground treasure. In woodlands and meadows across Viking territories, a small, unassuming plant with feathery leaves concealed a secret. Small edible tubers growing underground. Vikings called them earthnuts or pignuts, and they were prized as a sweet, nutty spring food that required knowledge and patience to harvest. What made pignuts special was their flavor and the challenge of finding them. The tubers are small, typically the size of a hazelnut or small walnut, and they grow 4 to 8 inches, 10 to 20 centimeters, underground. The plant itself is delicate and easily overlooked, with fine, feathery leaves and small white flowers. Vikings had to know exactly what to look for and where productive patches grew, making this knowledge valuable and closely guarded. The flavor of pignuts is sweet and nutty, similar to chestnuts or sweet chestnuts, but with a crisp, fresh texture when raw. Vikings ate them raw as a trail snack, roasted them like chestnuts, or added them to stews. The tubers could also be dried and stored, though they were most commonly eaten fresh in spring when they were easiest to find. The emerging leaves marked where to dig. Archaeological evidence suggests pignuts were used across Viking territories in Britain, Ireland, and parts of Scandinavia, where the plant grows. The tubers provided carbohydrates and a pleasant flavor during the hunger gap, and their sweetness was particularly valued after months of bland, preserved foods. For modern foragers, pignuts grow in woodlands, meadows, and hedgerows across Britain and parts of Europe. Proper identification is essential. The plant resembles other members of the carrot family, some of which are toxic. Look for the distinctive feathery leaves, small white flowers and umbels, and the characteristic smell when the plant is crushed. Dig carefully to avoid breaking the thin stem that connects the tuber to the plant above ground. The small underground treasures that Vikings patiently dug from woodland floors represent the detailed environmental knowledge that allowed Norse communities to find nutrition in places that seemed empty to outsiders. Every productive patch was remembered and returned to year after year, with families teaching children exactly where and how to find these hidden foods. These 17 spring foraging foods represent more than just historical curiosities or survival techniques from a distant past. They're evidence of sophisticated ecological knowledge that allowed Viking communities to thrive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Every plant on this list still grows wild across North America and Europe today, most dismissed as weeds or overlooked entirely. What's remarkable is how accessible these foods remain. No special equipment is required, no rare materials or complex techniques. The same plants that sustained Norse families through the Hunger Gap over 1,000 years ago are growing in forests, meadows, coastal areas, and probably your own backyard right now. Start with 1 or 2 plants that grow in your area. Learn to identify them with absolute certainty. Understand their seasons and habitats. Begin with small amounts to ensure you tolerate them well. Before long, you'll have access to wild foods that connect you directly to the land and to the generations of foragers who came before. And if you had a good time raiding the past with us today, do us a favor and pillage that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the fascinating and often surprising world of Midgard living.